people become cold-blooded killers, becomes easier next and easier and easier. Something dies inside.
Welcome to Fatherhood Voices, breaking the toxic cycle. Dive in as real dads bear all, the mess-ups, make-ups, and every heartfelt moment in between. It's raw, it's real, and it might just change the way you see family.
Welcome to another episode of Fatherhood Voices, episode 67. 67, wow. And here with my sidekick chick. I gotta stop saying that, Alyssa.
You need to stop saying
Yeah, I do. And we have a special guest today. And before I introduce him, let me just introduce him. Art Blahos, how are you?
I'm a blessed man. It's a pleasure to be here, Edward.
No, I'm excited. And you know,
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm telling you a funny story is when I used to dabble in this lifestyle, I actually picked up this book a long time ago, something I didn't share with you. I was really fascinated by this book back in the late 80s, early 90s back then. So I have your book. It's called Blood In, Blood Out. So if you haven't read it, definitely pick it up. And we'll put a link at the bottom so if you want to order it. But it's his story of how he joined the Mafia. And, you know, the tagline is, to join the Mafia, you kill. To leave the Mafia, you die. And it's a true revelation of him growing up in East LA and just the challenges he faced and how he started to dabble in that. But there's a bigger story here. You know, we can talk about the glamour and glory, if that's what you want to call it, of the life of gangs and oh my gosh, you know, the Mafia. But the deeper story is, what about that little boy? What about the story of that little boy that maybe didn't want to go in that direction? What about the future husband, the future father? How did that show up? Because, you know, I'm just going to be quick, and I'm going to be honest to say this, is that gangs are very different now than they were back then. Because there used to be a lot of loyalty, a lot of respect. And my transition out was starting to see when people were killing people from their own neighborhood because of silly things, because of girls or because of sports bets or so. But that's not what today's conversation is about. Today's conversation is going to be about little Art. You've heard, you've probably seen the podcast. You may have stumbled on the book, but I want to dive deeper and peel into fatherhood, husbandhood. What are your thoughts, Alyssa? You ready to take this journey with Art?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Well, Art, why don't you tell us a little bit about how life looks for you right now in the present? And then what we'll do is we'll peel the layers and go backwards.
Okay. Well, in the present, as I mentioned at the onset, I'm a blessed man to be here. I don't deserve to be here, but by the grace of God, I am here, and it's been 40 years now that I've been set free out of prison, 40 years that I beat the death penalty and all that horrendous stuff. And but I'm glad you mentioned that, Edward, that I'm talking to... okay. But I'm glad that you mentioned, too, that it isn't about gangs or to glorify them or, you know, not at all. In fact, it's hopefully to pull back the curtain, you know, some of the myths and some of the facade that people live by. And I like to call it the culture cartel. We have a beautiful culture, but there's a dark side to it also, you know. And then it begins with me. It began in childhood, you know, about my search for significance and my heroes, at that time, my role model.
You know, and I'm glad you brought that up about your childhood because, you know, we do a lot of work around the inner child.
Yes.
And we're under the strong belief that everything that happens in your future all stems from your childhood. And I'm even going to take it a step further and say that it starts prenatal. It starts when you're in your mother's womb. And if there's arguing and chaos and drugs and addictions, that's going to impact the fetus. That's going to impact the baby. You know, my story is I have Tourette's, but I honestly believe I developed Tourette's when I was in my mother's womb. And this is because of how mean my grandmother was towards my mom and how she didn't accept, you know, having these old cultural beliefs and how she was, just very angry and mean. And I believe that resulted in me getting Tourette's and that starting me passing out from me to my children. So I think trauma starts prenatal. And there's a lot of studies coming out about it. But when you talk about your inner child, what happened to little Art? Can I call you little Art?
Sure.
Okay. What happened to little Art what did childhood look like for you? And when did you start deciding, like, you were glorifying gangs as opposed to, Tom and Jerry or Mighty Mouse or, these other little cartoons and iconic heroes back in the day.
Yeah, I guess really not knowing it, but I guess an important factor would be that I never knew my mom or dad together. I never had that concept, and there was a reality in my home. Just me and my brother, and later on my sister. So I grew up in a home just mainly lacking that unity, that cohesion of that unit of a mom and a dad. And so young Art, probably the first thing I could remember is having to sort of establish myself in the neighborhood, establish myself in school, and I guess having that, not that father figure in the home, because as I said, they were never together, and he would come, off and on. And when I did see them, it was very rare, and it wasn't good. It wasn't a good look. But I guess I was searching, without really knowing it, for identity, for meaning in life as a youngster. And then in my little neighborhood, the little culture there where I grew up in, and I grew up in East Los Angeles, the Boyle Heights area, I was impacted immediately with a drive to, to dominate, a drive to protect, a drive to be strong. And later on that developed into darker and darker, avenues, of violence and force and power. But I learned very, very early. As a matter of fact, I was kicked out of school. I was in third grade. It's in the book. That I assaulted my third grade teacher. Even then, that was pretty rare. I didn't really hurt her, but still, it was the intent that wasn't good at all. So I got expelled from that, and then went to a boys' home. So I was about 9, roughly.
Wow.
So that, again, I guess my first, impact was, as I mentioned, violence. That was my avenue, and if I could always come out on top in this area, win every fight, and impress the girls, then that's all I really cared for. That was my little worldview then, with blinkers on, the neighborhood, in other words.
Let me ask you a question, just because you just triggered a thought. You said your father was in and out.
Mm-hmm.
If your father would have showed up, well, number one, was your father in the gang life?
No, he wasn't.
Okay. So if your father would have
He was
showed
in
up.
service and Marine and all that.
Really? Okay, so he came from
Army.
structure and discipline.
Airborne. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So so this is hypothetical, but if your father would have showed up more and maybe been present, do you think that would have shifted the outcome of how life was going to turn out for you in your early years?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I say that because speaking this as a Christian, and from a Christian worldview, fatherhood is the God's design for families, for communities and cities and nations and on and on. And if that building block of society is destroyed, and like in my case, never really came together, well, the outcome is pretty predictable. But yes, fatherhood is, as I mentioned, God's idea, pretty smart. So if he initiated this as an institution, for mankind, for humanity, it must have huge, huge benefits. But lacking those benefits, and not seeing those benefits, then there's a cost to pay. I'm part of that cost, not just in my life and years in prison, and influencing and sometimes destroying other lives, and my life too being impacted and destroyed. Through it all, I believe that it was the absence of a strong, present father made all the difference in the world. So I never had no one to look to.
So you didn't have any father figures, coaches, uncles, grandparents, a neighbor, somebody that could have stepped in that role?
I did have uncles and cousins, but they were gang members, and they were my role models. I didn't come to them, and I said, okay, well, if I'm ever going to be anything or survive in this world, then it had to be just like them, and strong, fast, quick to strike, and definitely never, ever, ever lose face. You mentioned earlier, I don't know if it's on camera or recorded, but about loyalty. There was, not that we were angels, totally opposite, but there was a sense of loyalty, camaraderie, a sense of meaning that now it is gone. It dissipated. But there's reason for that too.
Yeah.
And so that took the place that, it's been like cliche now. Family, that became my family, that became my father, that became my mom, everything to live and die was a neighborhood, and later on they would go through institutions and on and on and on, years and years of my life. But to me, I call that putting everything on the altar of sacrifice for a cause. And we're built that way.
Just you sharing that and you validating the fact that if your father would have been present, your life would have been different. It's just a wake-up call. You fathers out there, if you don't show up for your kids, you're going to pay the price. Not only are you going to pay the price, your family's going to pay the price. Your wife, their mother, they're going to pay the price because of the struggles emotionally, psychologically, financially, because they're going to dabble into gangs or drugs or just other types of addictions that aren't good for them. And just you validating that if you don't show up, you're setting your children up for a life of struggle. And that's sad that fathers need to put aside the alcohol and the women and all the other bull crap that's distractions. And you made this creation, you created this child, show up for them. Or don't bother being a father.
Agree, Edward. Total agreement. And as I mentioned, I would put things on the altar of sacrifice, but so did they. And it comes down to greed, self-centeredness. And I think a word you use often, what was that? Narcissism?
Narcissism, yes.
And just thinking about, themselves, their time, and what makes them feel good or look important or financially, then especially, with money, power, and women, though it's a big, big, big influence too. But like in my case too, it's women happen to play a tremendous part in my journey in life, and in fact, even coming to know the Lord Jesus Christ years later. But that good, positive influence direction began with women. Not with my dad. My dad should have been there, but not that he wasn't a good man. I respect him highly, but he had some of his priorities misdirected, I think some of it just plain selfishness.
I don't know, Alyssa, what are your thoughts as a daughter of going through the struggles of me not being present in your early years and just hearing how his dad not showing up impacted him?
It plays a big role. It plays a big role on somebody. I had a father who was physically there in the home most of the time, who worked a lot, but prioritized work and provided the basic necessities of what you were told, a house, clothes, food. But emotionally, there wasn't any support there. And I wasn't allowed to show emotion. So I knew I couldn't even go to my father. And if I did, then I just got to suck it up. You don't be weak. You don't show weakness.
Wow. It's amazing, too. As you're speaking, at the time, too, they don't have the foresight to see the treasure that's right there before them. You said responsibility. That's another word I use for maturity. To be responsible, to be a man, and to realize that the young lady, or the child then is going to grow up to be, a young woman, and maybe she has talent, skills, abilities, and who knows what she could become. And a lot of times that's the treasure, right there in our house, and we neglect it, or watching the game, or whatever. You probably watching the game here, and they're probably starving for your attention, your affection. And that's one thing I did, and without even realizing it, that, we're made that way, and there is a drive, for meaning. Why am I here? What is my purpose? Once you find that out, it changes everything. I didn't mean to go off. Of course.
No. This is beautiful. You said you sought out a family because you didn't have a family intact, so you gravitated towards the gangs. Mm-hmm. Did you find that family within them?
I thought I did. Now that's the deception. That's why when I see even today people all tattooed up, and well, not everybody got tattoos now. Everybody, but then it was this. I would see that as a sign of faith, misplaced, misdirected faith. But that stuff is India ink. It doesn't come off. They're blasting their neighborhoods, names, and this side, that side, colors, or whatever. But that's a declaration of meaning, of, I count for something. And that is huge. We must, I had a sense of, I had to count for something. One of the worst things you could tell any neighborhood or any gang member in my day, in my generation, was that, you don't count for nothing. Bro, just, put a bullet in my head, Your word doesn't count for nothing. You don't count for nothing. You're nobody, Oh, no. That's unacceptable. Could not live with that. And I had to count for something. And my word has to mean something. That's all I had. And once that's taken away, then what is left? But here's the deception, Edward, is that for a long time, I thought it was real. I thought it was worth dying for. I thought it was worth doing 17 years in prison, not seeing my family and my sisters, my mom, whatever, my dad even. And I said, this is my family, this is my brotherhood. Well, you look at the names, God, Father, hello, family, wow. Hello, those whole biblical concepts, brothers and sisters, all those are things that substitutes, for the real deal, and the real plan of a father and family, and a mom and dad together, priceless.
Wow.
I know you talked about you did have a sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
You had uncles, you had cousins, you had this brotherhood.
Yes.
But going back to when you were a child, was there any moments when you felt like you felt alone or unloved, and maybe somehow that might have impacted you turning towards this lifestyle?
I didn't realize that I was looking for love. There wasn't even a word we ever used at our home, like that was like, get about it, Who says that? Girls, grandmas, hey, me, love, And, but I didn't realize that at the time that's what I truly was looking for, longing for, acceptance, to accept me for who I am, no matter what I've done. That's one thing that's a draw for the neighborhoods. They'll accept you, as you are, You don't got to go through an entrance exam, and pass, a certain criteria, and just follow the game. They'll accept you. So that was a powerful, and still is a powerful lure. Now it's more, these days is more of greed, financial, drugs, and all the other things are. Wait, I want to get back to your question. Repeat that again. I'm sorry.
Oh, just if you ever felt alone or unloved.
Alone, yes, I did. But as I mentioned, I didn't know it.
You did.
I didn't know there was an absence. There was something missing. So I would try to fill that, with recognition. Look how bad I am. Look how good I am. I'm never lost. And all that. But that was just like almost an addiction. It's almost a distraction. Something is missing in the life, so I have to fill it with something. In this case, it was violence and acceptance, and they would say your name, that would mean something. My name was, Conejo, even though it means silly, or it's a rabbit, but, that name.
So can we ask why Conejo?
Well,
like were you hopping around?
Well, 50 pounds ago, and many, many years ago, I was fast. I was real fast. So I was Conejo.
That joke probably about
Yeah, couldn't
30,
catch
40 years ago would have got me killed. But,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
in a different place.
Yeah, nobody would ever call me Arthur. Oh, man. Had to be Conejo. Well,
You
never
mentioned,
say Art.
you mentioned something that, we just got back from a concert over the weekend in Vegas with my younger daughter, and it was called Pierceville and Sleeping with Sirens. And I did a whole post about
Wow.
these kids were the misfits. They were the ones that dressed emo, so they were the kids that were bullied, that didn't have community. And you said something that hit. You said the gangs would accept anybody.
Yeah.
And, we were going to do our podcast yesterday, we shifted and we did it strictly on how if your kids are different, you have to show up for them. Parents need to pay attention to the books that they're reading, the music that they're listening to, because this music that they play, it's raw. It's about suicidal ideation and hurt and pain and the loss of love. And there's even a song, what's it, The Father's Trophy? What?
A trophy father's. Wait,
And
you messed me up. But it's a Sleeping with Sirens song. It's like a trophy father's trophy son. That's what it is.
And it's a story about, Father, where are you? I'm here and you don't see me. And so when we were in that concert, the emotions, the tears, and then I was in line to get my daughter some merch, and then songs would play and kids would start crying and say, I remember when I was in a dark place and I wanted to kill myself. And the songs helped them through. So to hear you say that the gangs will accept anybody, it's whether it's the gangs, the different types of music, the cultures, whether it's EDM music for the plural community, peace, love, unity, respect, or emo. Kids are searching for a tribe. They're searching for belonging.
Yes.
And if parents don't stand up, if the aunts and uncles don't stand up, the cousins don't stand up to make them feel apart, then they gravitate towards the bad. And that hit right there when you said that. Gangs don't discriminate. They will accept you because they can always find bad work for you to do.
Definitely. And, as looking at it through the lens of a Christian, there is evil. There is a right and a wrong. But for a long time, I did not, even realize that, what I was doing was wrong, what I was doing was evil. And then I was just intent, on destroying, intent in doing those kind of things. But there is absolutely a drive, for significance, and begins way back in childhood. And it developed. And as I mentioned earlier, the concept about putting on the altar of sacrifice everything that has any meaning or value, I was willing to do that. That's the deception that people buy in my generation, and they buy it today too, even though it could be different things, cartels, syndicates, mafias, whatever it is. The bottom line is that based on greed, is based on
Power, greed.
that's a big one. Control. And if you got power and control, then you have everything that comes with it, for a minute. And the scripture speaks about that too, that, there's pleasure even in sin for a moment, and then comes the consequences. I tell kids all the time, I'm able to sometimes speak at different, institutions, juvenile halls, even prisons, and I tell them this, that, you're free to choose. You men, and sometimes there's women prisons, you men and women, you're free to choose, but listen carefully. You are not free to choose the consequences. They'll be made for you.
It's funny because
They will be made for you. Trust me.
Yeah. As you're talking, I was thinking about what got me started in the life of gangs was bullying first. But then the second thing was the girls. Man, they just love the bad boy. Even to this day, some of my kids still struggle with, they love the bad boys, and they like that life of heartache, heartache and struggle and pain. And but I'm sorry, I think you were going to ask a question.
No, I just.
We don't want to go down that path,
No,
right?
no,
Okay.
we're
Okay.
good.
So
We're gonna glaze over that one.
No, but I believe too that just adding a little bit to that, why there's an attraction to the dark side. I believe too that if you go one step further and look into that, is because of the safety, the protection, the ability, that this man, would provide, even though it's a little dark, it's like a trade-off, And then, of course, sometimes it comes with, the perks, like, hey, bling bling and all that stuff. But I think if you look at it, there's a reason for that. You as a psychologist, doctor, know that there is a trade-off, and then sometimes, people are willing to make that, sacrifice. But
Why? Well, let me just say one thing. That's where daddy issues come from. These girls that have these daddy issues,
No.
they're seeking out something that daddy couldn't because daddy didn't show up. So now they're seeking out another man. So if a man shows up and he treats her mother bad, then they think that's okay. And if the mother allows it, then she's just validated that that's okay. I mean, is that?
Yeah, you're repeating the toxic cycle of violence. So that is what it is.
no, I agree with you. Should I call you doctor? No. No, I agree, because that's one thing 20 years ago that when I got together with my wife, Anna, and today I call her the lovely, the beautiful, the talented Art Blajos. But that's one thing I was cognitive. I was aware that I had to treat or love the kids. I had to love. There was 3 girls. And I didn't know what I was asking for, but hallelujah. 3 girls and a boy.
3 girls and a boy.
And then,
Add water, instant family.
so,
A whole lot of problems.
yeah, I wanted her, but then it comes with the package. But, I thank God for that too, because if anybody thinks they're perfect, just get married.
Well, that's
break that myth real quick.
You know what? That's a good transition. Let's transition into.
Sure.
And then we'll go a little bit backwards. But you opened up a door that I think we're curious about some questions. So you meet Anna, and you've transitioned out of this life, and how did that look? So here's someone that's maybe not participating in all that crazy and chaos, and how did that happen?
Well, that, to be honest, Edward, is that all goes to the Lord, because first came salvation, that got me out of this, this horrible pit that I was in, this bondage I was in, physical, mental, spiritual, and I'm not, as I mentioned, I'm not supposed to be here. But once the Lord delivered me, and that's another story you can read in the book, is by the man I was supposed to execute, as an assassin. So that is incredible. But the power to get me out of that darkness, into the light, into a right mind, and somebody into, psychology and doctors and on. They know that, it's not supposed to happen. And if it does happen, there's so much baggage and garbage that comes with it, But it's like a minor miracle. So before I met Anna, I was already a Christian for a number of years,
Okay.
And then God, who working on my mind, to the scriptures, the Spirit of God, fellowship, of course, with the church. You need community, In my case, I thank God there was a Christian men's home that taught me, how to grab a hold of the concepts of prayer and discipline, those kind of things that I thought I had, but I was all wrong, But then when Anna began to stalk me, no, I just kidding. She's never stalked. When Anna came into the picture, it was the Lord, because for years, let's keep it real, because of my background and my lifestyle, I was sort of hesitant, who I would pull into that lifestyle, because there could be a target, on her now, or the children. So for years and years, over 10 years, easy, people tell me, dude, well, didn't have hair and all that stuff. I was kind of good looking. I used to be good looking. And they say, well, how can you get married, do stuff with that, And I said, well, in time, in God's time. But the real reason was, I was very, very careful. If I did, it would have to be God, because she could be subject to, things. And of course, because of this, I've been through a lot of stuff and guns pulled on me and stuff. So I thought twice for years and years and years before I would, marry. So it had to be a confirmation that she was the one. She was the one, and oh, what a blessing, and it made me complete as a man. She's like the crown, the crown on my head is, and without a woman, you're definitely incomplete, lacking. And I always say God is pretty smart. He knows what he's doing, and he brings them together. The two shall be one.
Yes.
Oh, curious to know, how did you feel when you met the children?
That was something else too. I was very careful, and then again, because I'm a licensed ordained minister of the gospel, I haven't lived with girls in the house, and so that was kind of awkward. You go to the bathroom, and say, what is this? Say, no. Clean this mess up, or do that, or do that. So then I became very, very, I guess, super cautious, about, how I always treated them with respect and make sure nothing came across, funny. And for the sake of the Lord first, then the wife, and then the kids, And then, but they were, kids are smart, very smart. They would, I would see them. At first, I wouldn't get it. I was thinking, man, why are they looking at this? They was looking, and everything I do, they would look. They would, they were studying me to see how I treated that woman. That's mama. So everything depended. If I wasn't messed up or treated her bad or did anything, God forbid, they would have said, it's a wreck. Get this bum out of here.
Well, let me tell you how smart kids are. So
They're smart.
One day, when she was in 7th grade, they were doing an assignment about go on and Google your parents and, see all about them so you can tell them. And she went and Googled and drummed up some stuff from the past that was never meant to be shared, but was all over the media. So that made for an uncomfortable conversation. Who were you, 6th, 7th, 8th grade?
on blast?
It was an assignment.
How old were you?
13?
Oh, wow.
So we had to have some real conversations at 13. Dad's indictment and charges and, a bunch of stuff that was probably better left, in the closet. But that's okay. Yeah, so children are resilient. They're like I said, they're just buckets of knowledge. It's always like looking.
No, that's kudos to you as a man, too. That's manhood. That's motherhood. Like that. It's out there, and
It's out there.
and she's willing to accept it, and this is the way it was, but now it's not. So that's fatherhood too. It says you got to step up and admit your failures, your mom. That's not
Own your truth, own your authenticity, right?
The truth is
That's
set
my
you-
story. I love that. How do you have this conversation with the kid? So when you met the kids, they were already like in their early teens.
Yeah.
So
12, 13.
How does this
13,
conversation?
14?
How does this conversation have like about your past? Like, do you guys introduce it, or do they how does that happen? Because they've got to be concerned, like they're protecting Mama Bear, with mom, and then now you're coming to the picture, and it's like, yeah, you may be an ordained minister, and you may have made some changes, but you still got it in you.
Yes.
So, and that's mom right there.
That's what they
How did that conversation happen, or what was the incident?
First
that
of
happened?
all, a lot of prayer. A lot of prayer and grace and asking for wisdom, because I see this is a new situation. I never lived, I lived with men all my life. I'm not going to say that, nothing. But living with women, it's a totally different animal, and they have like a different perception and an eye and things in life. And sometimes it's like they could just see right through you, And young too, 13, 14, but they're reading you. They're studying you, and then, then I would dread the little huddles, Then they're looking like...
I know those
me.
huddles. I know what you're talking about.
Heck, What are you looking at me for? What could you do, like, what? Like, that's the worst thing to do, So, okay, praise the Lord, hope it's good, Anna coming, hey, hi, babe, how you doing? How was your day, whatever, But it was how I felt... I felt that, first of all, I saw them as children, made in the image of God, young people with gifts and talents and ability. And I saw them as, first of all, as God's property, His possession, His daughter. Don't you dare, hurt them in any way. So that was my, I guess, my first safeguard and how God saw them. And then my responsibility as a father to them and to be that example. And it was hard. It was awkward. I mean, they call you on everything. You don't make no mistakes, especially in the beginning, Oh, you're a Christian? You said this? I said, "Oops, you're lying." I said, I thought you didn't lie. I said, Christians don't lie, and on and on. They're calling every little thing. But it was good because it kept me on my P's and Q's. And then finally, the barriers begin to break down. Trust is established. You got to earn it, And then, of course, again, the main thing was how I treated Mom. And I finally got their approval, Our son, he was cool, I said, all right, you're cool, Sooner than the girl. The girl.
Okay, so he wasn't more of the, so it was more the girls that were more the, more protectors, more like around.
Yes.
Okay, now I was gonna ask you that question too.
Yeah.
What about
the
the son? Was he the one that was like overprotective because Mama?
With him, I could relate to guys more easy. Go out, go fishing, you do something. Go to the movies, game. No problem. So I won over pretty good. The girls there.
That makes sense.
Show me. You got to do more than that. Go more than the movies. No. Right.
You say your children. Do you consider them your stepchildren, or do you consider them?
I've never ever called them stepchildren ever. My wife could attest. I never ever, and I never will. Because for a minute I lived, as I would call it second class citizen, a stepchild. And I went to homes, and they would call you, different things, or you come from a tore up home or a broken home. Stepchild or whatever, but I never addressed them as that's my kids, And then first of all, at first, the first name basis, call them by the name, respect them, always respect them, honor them. As I said, as God's property first, and then her children, our children. I never call them call them our kids.
That's
Sons
perfect.
and daughters. I even told. Edward came in. This is my daughter's house. She lives here. You're up there, right there. That's Lalo, the husband, and then Annalisa, and Juliana is not here. Where is she? Oh, okay.
Was there any hardcore pushback at any point with the kids?
Yes, and. It came from different sources. The most severe pushback came, of course, from these guys. But I won't go into that right now. So I think you want to focus more on the family and the community and that aspect. So there was pushback on this because you don't go. You don't do that. That's an oath, blood in and blood out. So it's supposed to take your life. And that's another thing, but I just trusted God. But the pushback came sometimes from my family. They were because they're still impacted and influenced by the culture. In that culture, I was somebody. I had a name. So that came with perks and, recognition in the neighborhood. So it's there's a lot of influence that I had there and my name. And a lot of the family, it was hard. They would say, what did you do? How could you do that? And, you rode, you've accomplished so much, in that world, it's like going to Harvard. Yale, I got my degree, top of the food chain. And that's how they would see it, right? And they were, why'd you do it? first of all, I tell him I've never, given nobody up, never debriefed, never told, I just tended to the Lord and trusted him. And he's kept me all these years. And, but with the family, there was like a pushback, and there was this disowning, for a few years, well, you're not part of this family, you're not welcome here,
And I'm curious about that because you said your uncles and so forth were from the gang life. So then now you come out, you
That
become
hurt.
a Christian and you go this different life. So then now se cree mucho, like, oh, you think
Yes.
you're too good. Oh, now he's, he's with the
Exactly.
Joneses. So how did that look like? Because now it's like, oh, does he
Wow.
think he's better than us? Because
Yeah, I expected a red carpet, of course, and you testimony, come, you tell what God did, So I remember talking to some family and then some people from the neighborhood then, and they're listening. And there was one girl that I really liked, and I thought I was really, impressing her, with the story, the grace of God, and the impossible situation. So one by one, they began to walk away. I'm not even done yet, right? And then the girl says, "Nah, I like the old Conejo better. This is whack." What? And then my family begins to walk away. You know what? Keep doing your thing. Just keep on stepping. Really like that. So there was no red carpet. There was no dun 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 dun. Big, hero welcome. No, they looked at it almost like a betrayal to the culture, to them, to the family. So that kind of pushback hurt. Like, wow, what do you do? I fought, bullets, guns, knives.
for them and they turn your back.
And then how do you fight this?
Yeah.
How do you push back on that? Their family, their friends, So, again, the grace of God in the community of my church, Victory Outreach, helped me so much to get to this.
And it's funny you mentioned community because, big reflection is, I always say that if you show me your friends, I will show you who you are. So if at one time your community was on the dark side and gang members and, prison life and so forth, and then now you transitioned into, church, into a whole different community. And it really not only shows who a person is, but then you start to see who they are. So I think community is a very important part. So whether it's on the dark side or the light side, but community does dictate who you are as a person.
We're built that way. We're built, like I said, negative or positive, but we need people. And with that saying goes, people need people, or the luckiest people, something like that. But community is essential one way or another. We're going to have it, and then they play on this. In fact, gangs, they play on loyalties, and that's a community. After when you mentioned, until you begin to realize that you're living a lie. That's what happened to me. The cracks began to show up, in my belief system. And it's a philosophy. It's what it really is, that this isn't real. And all the time, I thought it was real. That's what I meant by the deception, And some men and some fathers, even to this day, they've been in the Pelican Bay, Corcoran prison, 20, 25 years. And like I said, I'll tather up and tell you stories and war stories. But in the meantime, they didn't know their kids. They graduated from college. They haven't been to their weddings, their anniversaries, quinceañeras, and then somebody else is remarried with their wife. And so it's like somebody flipped a script, but they're buying it, Some of these guys are bright. Incredible minds, but something is wrong. Something is twisted. So instead of being out there providing the fathers, workers, and protectors, and spending all the time they did in prison, in college, or getting a degree or whatever, some kind of career, they're wasting their lives in the wrong lane, they got the wrong script. The script was flipped, and but they buy it, and then you look at the music, and the music now for all kinds of really a worship of death, you know, and a lot of gangster rap and the narco music, and it's getting more and more intense and violent, but they're glorifying, you know, worshiping death. In fact, at one time, my birthday was a big thing, you know, November 2nd, you know, in the Aztec calendar, Day of the Dead, you know, Dia de los Muertos, you know, but now, you know, death is an enemy, you know, why are they going to worship that? You know, I understand the culture, the good parts, but, you know, there's so much that could be said about family and community. And with my case, I'm here only because of the grace of God.
What was one of, if you can reflect back to your time in prison, can you share one intimate moment that was just maybe one of your hardest moments where you just maybe had a breakdown with just maybe something you haven't shared before? Something that just, that's truly raw and cut from the heart that you just,
Well, you know what? I remember, and the reason I remember it is because I was just hearing a song on the radio coming down from Bakersfield. Took almost 5 hours to get here. Crazy traffic. But anyway, there was a song called Rose-Colored Glasses. Came out a long time ago in the, I think the late 70s, early 80s. And it's a country song. But it speaks about a man, it's a love story, and he sees this woman, you know, through rose-colored glasses, you know. And then someday he's hoping there'll be a cry of his heart where he could take off those rose-colored, because he knows in his heart, you know, she doesn't love him. You know, she's playing him, you know, and he says, one day I hope, you know, I could take him off. And then look at her, and then she'll accept me for who I am and just tell me that I love you. But he says, until then, I just put back on the rose-colored glasses. So I would hear that song, and then when I would hear it, I was on the shelf in San Quincy prison, or part of it is death row. And I think it was just God beginning to penetrate and break my hard heart. He does it by increments, you know, with different people, different ways. And I'm looking, and I could see the top of trees and the blue light coming in. I know it sounds corny, but it's true. Mm-hmm. And I'm watching it, and then the song, Rose-Colored Glasses. And then that I knew I was living a lie. That was the hardest thing. And, you know, now how do you do that? Who do you go to? You know, you look in the mirror, and you're fake. You're living a lie. Even though I was, you know, somebody had a rep, you know. I said, you're living a lie, and I know it. So from that moment on, little by little, by increments, begin to realize, man, wow, I guess I'll never, ever get out. I'll never, ever, you know, see a woman that I love. And but until then, I'm here, you know, in this concrete box of steel and cement, and keep on the rose-colored glass. Wow. I don't know. I don't know where I went with
that was powerful. That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
This episode is sponsored by Aloha Imports, the sprays that make your worst-smelling secrets disappear. Listen, I love people, but I don't love their shoes or their oops, I ate a burrito bathroom breaks. And I really don't love pretending I don't smell it. That's why I keep Aloha Imports products in the house, in my car, honestly, probably in every bag I own. They've got Sweet Feet for foot funk, Shoe Fly for that one pesky fly, Smoke Off for smoke clouds that linger like your last situationship, and Crapper Zapper for the bathroom situation. You know the one. Aloha Imports doesn't cover it up with flowers and lies. They end it, silently, like a tropical ninja with a vendetta. So if you live with roommates, pets, or anyone who eats food and then, you know, processes that food, you need this. Go to alohaimports.com, stock up, and enjoy living in a house that doesn't smell like a regret.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask was, when you became a hitman, did you feel anything, any fear or feel or was it just pure survival mode that you were in?
That was a very good question. To be honest, I wasn't a psychopath, but because the reason I know that is because I didn't want to. It just happened, growing up, you're influenced by the big homies, the shot callers, and happened to be in the yard, and somebody's had to be hit, moved on. And I was a youngster. I wasn't a made guy yet. And they called me, some of the big homies, the legends then. And they say, hey, Conejo, what's up? And they hand me a knife, bone crusher. And they go, see the sawzall? Yeah, I see. I never knew him from Adam. Take him out tomorrow, when they come out. Are you down? In my heart, I was going to say, you don't even know the fool. I didn't know him, But I said, yeah, in front of them, she's, the culture, the standard. These guys are heroes, legends. I go, yeah, I got this, don't trade. So I go back to my cell, and there's 18 or 19, but I'm a kid, and I'm pacing back and forth. And I did all kinds of violence before, but I'm pacing back and forth now. And I'm thinking, okay, big mouth, you put your foot in it now. What are you going to do now? I didn't want to do it. There's only a way out of this, But without losing face, that was the thing. That was the face. That was the catch, the bondage. And so I said, maybe I could just tell him I was joking, you guys. Well, I don't think so. Not going to go over too good, Or I could tell him, it's not going to happen. Then have to lock up, go to protective custody and mess off the table. And the third option was do it. So nobody knew. And then, I never speak of this. Maybe I spoke about it before, maybe. But very rarely do I do. And that was, could have went either way. If somebody would have came and told me, hey, there's a way out of this. It sounds crazy, but there is a way. What? I would have listened. I would have listened. Who knows? Who knows? And then I could have came to the Lord a lot sooner. But the next day, the whistle sounds, shots are fired, and there it is. It is what it is, So I didn't want to do it, but it's, I guess, peer pressure, the force of community, the negative way, There's no backing out if you had a safe face, So, but that term used, and this is probably a good a time to insert it, is that people become, cold-blooded killers. Becomes easier next time. And easier and easier. Something dies inside. We're not made that way. Once you do that, you go against conscience. Eventually you destroy it. You go against, it's wrong. You don't got to tell you, it's wrong. But, the culture is so strong, and the bonds of people are like steel that, okay, I'm going to go. And with fear and trembling, that I could have got shot, anything. But that was the first time here he comes, Like I said, I wasn't stranger to violence, a lot of violence, but never, sober, in my right mind, does not occur with me. I'm alone, so it's me and the gunpowder and the target, and here it goes, So.
As we start to come towards the end, I want to talk about redemption and transformation. And a series of questions that kind of showed up that we wanted to ask.
So I know that you mentioned that you were having a crisis of conscience and that you were going through that because, like you said, you didn't want to do these things that you felt that you had to. And I want to know, how did you start forgiving yourself for that? How did you forgive your past?
No, that's a very good question. I think I've answered that in this little story here. That once I went to, well, first of all, the man I was supposed to, hit, he's the one that brought the message of the gospel, in a dark and dangerous place, on death row. And that's another story, But God moves in mysterious ways. So he's right there, the man, I'm supposed to kill him. He's on the list, and he's the one that begins to preach or share. And he's using cocaine. Crazy story. He's using cocaine. And then he begins to talk about Jesus. So I don't want to hear it. But at the same time, I don't want to scare him. I want him to come out together. And make a long story short, I say a prayer. I don't move on him. I could have. We're in striking distance. When he came out for showers, I didn't. And then that was the beginning, of the process, I didn't really know what was going on, but he told me, just call upon the Lord, Conejo, there's a place for the fella, And he says it's called Victory Outrageous. He didn't say outreach. He said Victory Outrageous. I go, what's that? It was a place for the fella. It's a Christian church, So I said that prayer, but in my cell, again, I came out with him. I didn't strike him. He was shaking in his boots because he knew he had something coming. But he didn't know that I knew for sure. Okay? So anyway, doors began to open. Charges began to get dropped. After that prayer, it's a miracle in a dark and a dangerous place. And I tell a lot of people sometimes, God shows up in camouflage. The most mysterious circumstances, people, and places. So I go to the Christian home. I'm there 11 months in the home. I'm at the altar. I become a counselor. I become staff, That's where you learn how to pray, the disciplines, and, study the Bible, so on and so forth. A work ethic, legally. And so I become like a counselor, and I'm praying for this brother at the altar. And then somebody grabs my hand, and I look, and it's a woman. It's an older white lady. And she, take your hand off my son's shoulder. Says his name, And I go, what? And she goes, I know who you are. There's blood on your hands. You have no, how dare you? I was all indignant. So it sort of like messed me up. Baby Christian, really. So I go, you got a point, I guess. So I back off, and we go back to the dorm, to the house, and I'm packing my stuff, because I'm all, I'm all messed up. Yeah, she's right. What am I praying for somebody? I'm just, dirtbag myself, Who do I think I am? I bring nothing to the table. So I'm packing up. I want to go. I'm going to bounce. I'm out of here. It wasn't for me anyway. I was just, on a good one, I was tripping, But then the director comes, a friend of mine I knew, Joe Lugo, he comes. I knew for San Quentin. So he happens to be the director there, and he says, what are you doing? Art, what are you doing? I say, I'm out here, man. I miss you, all this stuff, So-and-so said, I have no right to pray for her son, And he said, what? Yeah, She pulled my hand off her son's shoulder. She did. She said, how dare you, and blah, blah, blah. He says, okay, listen. First of all, let me tell you, then I'll talk with her later. And then the pastor went later on, talk with her. He says, you're here not because of merit. You're here not because you earned anything. You're here, and that's what makes Christianity unique. Because before the degree, before the entrance exam, comes a degree. Like, what? I didn't earn this. You got to, faith without works is dead. You got to, put in some work, of course, show your gratitude. But, he says, no, you've been forgiven by the blood of Jesus Christ. That's what the cross is all about. That's what the cross is all about. His blood, not yours. She was right in that aspect. But, you do have the right to pray for somebody, And then you've been freely forgiven, He has been forgiven much. love as much, continue praying, continue doing that, and what God did for you, He'll do for somebody else, and on and on and on and on. So, I don't know if I answered your question as far as, the mother and how I felt, but then I began to understand. It wasn't a feeling so much. It wasn't a feeling so much as it was first an acknowledgement that it's not because of me, because of the merit of somebody else. I'm here because somebody else put in work. Somebody else, put it this way, went to the gas chamber for Art Blahos. Because I fought that in the LA County Jail, almost 5 years. The death penalty, almost 5 years. The trial at QE. At that time, it was a gas chamber. And then I began to find out, in my understanding then, is that somebody did go to the gas chamber for me. Somebody did take my penalty. Somebody did die for me. But on the third day, that gas chamber was opened, and He walked out. The Lord walked out. On that basis, on His merit, on what He did, I have forgiveness of sins. So first it was an acknowledgement by faith, and then it became an inner reality. And I realized that it was Him all along. And it's been in these 40 years, and I've been around the globe telling people this story.
What would you say to the families of your victims if you could speak to them directly?
And that's a hard one too. And I've had to confront a few of those. And again, it's like the mother, how dare you, who do you think you are? And one time I was in London, I was being interviewed, and they tell me, Mr. Blajos, they say, let's have a look at the tattoo, Say, what? It's like an interview, with the camera and stuff. This book just came out. Let's have a look at the tattoo, Say what? The tattoo. Oh, you mean the tattoo? Tattoo of the black hand. So I got it here. It's all faded right now. So I showed them the tattoo and stuff, and they loved it. You can hear the camera. And they say, it looks like a foot. I go, hey, whatever. That's the black hand, And so I showed them that, the tattoo. And now what I'm going down this way.
Oh,
I'm on track.
What you would say to the families of the victims?
Yeah. Okay. So okay. Yeah. I went off track a little bit. So they said it looked like a foot, and then they asked me. One reporter asked me, and it caught me off guard. And he says, then it was in the 90s, and the death penalty was there in the UK. They outlawed it in some of the states in California. Now the UK is doing the same thing. And they say, what do you think about the death penalty? Should it be outlawed? Since you beat the death penalty, and you're on admission, you should have died. And so I was stunned. I was stuck there for a second. So I'm looking at the reporter, and I go, And then, what do I say here? I tell him, look, even we believe in the death penalty. That's why, that's the code, That's a vow, blood in and blood out. It's like a 187. It's like, God even says, the soul who sins shall die, and then he shall die at the hands of man. He who murders, thou shalt not commit murder, and on and on. All those are biblical concepts. And, there's none righteous, no, not one. That's in the New Testament. And so, the way I feel about them, the victims, and it's ugly, but all I could tell them is this, is that I don't, you got to be very careful too, because sometimes they're, they don't want to hear it. They run out. I get that too, or they're calling you California's #1 driver, whatever, And so it does hurt, and you can't ever bring them back. You will never come back. But what I can do, the reason I'm doing this here is to prevent maybe your son, maybe your nephew, maybe your dad, maybe your daughter, I don't know, from doing this, and telling them it's a lie and there is a way out. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, you're not beyond the reach of God. Wow. That's what I tell them. There's hope. In other words, I try to leave them with hope, instead of death.
Yes.
I once was a messenger of death, but now you're looking at a messenger of life and hope. Who could do that?
I love that.
Not me. Not me.
I'm curious to know if your children or your grandchildren were bullied or hurt today, how would you handle that now compared to the man that you used to be?
I say my wife. No, no. That is a very, very good question. And first of all, I would have to just suppress, the first instinct. Of course, I can't do that. And then I would talk to them, first of all, and let them know that, I love them. I'm with you. I'm in your corner. You have a friend, Now let's go deal with this fool now. Yes, kid, for the record. But I'd encourage them. I'm with you guys, and I would just take it from there. It depends on the situation. If you got to go to school, we'll talk to the people, we'll talk to the parents, but we'll come to some kind of resolution. But I mainly assure them that you're not alone. That I love you. I love them.
And how would you?
I wouldn't like it at all.
How would you give them advice on handling anger, conflict, or violence? How do you teach them differently?
Well, again, I would tell them that very rarely, does very rarely does violence just happen spontaneously. Usually it is preceded by either words, gestures, circumstances. I would try to direct them to the source, of all violence and anger, and it's the heart. The heart is the heart of the matter. And if you have a right heart, and that takes, of course, teaching and discipleship and parenting, and from school and churches, more churches, not so much schools no more, but let them know that, have a right heart, towards people. Sometimes people who bully you or say things that hurt you, it's because they're hurt. And you've heard this before, and psychologists hurt people. And I know they could be, young, but just try to, let them know that people who hurt you, they could be hurting a lot more. There's reasons for this, and we don't really know. So forgiveness would come in. I would try to give them the concept of forgiveness. It's huge, because if you don't, it's like, we know what handcuffs are. And unforgiveness is like having mental handcuffs. You put yourself in bondage. Forgive. Let it go. It may be hard, but then grace will come in, help you to do what you can do. And the kids are tremendous. They understand it. They're smarter than me.
Thank you for that. And as we go into the final segment, and this is about legacy, hope, and final reflections, a question I have is, what's the one thing you want your children and grandchildren? Let me rephrase that. What do you want children and the children of incarcerated parents to know about the lifestyle that their father or even mother may be struggling with in prison?
Okay, well, I have family that's in prison, and they have children that are out here struggling, men and women. And those that are there, the men that are there in prison, and the women, they would do anything to have another chance. They would do anything to have another opportunity, one last time, to redirect, how I would do this or I would.
When does
handle
that show up? You hit something powerful. Does that show up like a month, a year? Like when do you have that epiphany? Like when you're sitting here looking around, and when does that happen for someone? Where they truly feel, I know it's different from person to person, but what is I just want to say the norm of someone sitting there in silence because there's a lot of time to think, that you just sit there and repent and go, what did I just do? Like, was this all worth it? Is there like a time frame?
Who's
I
the
guess?
cries of the heart? Yeah, those are cries of the heart, and it's the heart, that's breaking. And for things that, like I said, what did I do or what didn't I do? In many cases, and what should I have done? It's time of reflection. And like in my case, I try to get them to realize, that you can call on somebody, no matter where you are, no matter who you are. And of course, as a Christian, I would tell them, call upon the Lord. He's willing to forgive, even if you're there in a dark dungeon, a cell, whatever. Just call upon him. You watch him move. And then, of course, I'll use my example. That it's never too late. Even from a dark shell, you could help the future of your child. For one thing, not to come here, to expose all this fake news, fake culture, and to give you directed to the real meaning of life, to the one who loves them, to the one that you're made in his image, if you know it or not, all the attributes you have, to love, and even those things, sometimes even of anger and wanting to change something, those are signs, that something is wrong. Signs of transit, something has to happen, something has to change. It could be there in the dark cell crying out, See the kids that come on visiting, and I've seen this many times. I've done it myself. The father puts his hand on the glass, quarter-inch bulletproof glass, but so close, yet so far. And I've seen grown men just, weeping and, trying to, and there's sand in here. Sand, you're the jail, bro. There's no sand here. But, they want to touch, if I could. And they can reach. And there's someone, who can go into the homes through the glass, and it's not too late, to call upon the Lord. And it's not too late for the children either. I've seen so many things happen, so many families restored, marriages restored. I mean, we have a few PhDs now in our ministry. Yeah, not far from here, matter of fact.
Final two questions as we wrap up a powerful interview. How do you want your wife, your children, and your grandchildren to remember you?
That one is pretty simple. I want them to remember me as a man who loved God, who was grateful for another chance, and a man who loved their mama. That way, That's what I'll say. Remember, and that, and hopefully they'll do better, and go further and higher, and in all areas, education and beyond, So like a bridge, that would be the bridge, a man who loves God.
What is the one message that you want to leave to somebody listening that maybe feels hopeless or unforgivable?
Okay. Well, you're looking at a man who thought he was beyond redemption, a man who the experts and psychiatrists and doctors, no, but they wanted, back in the day, they wanted to give me, what's that thing where they killed the memory hair, the frontal lobes, shock treatment. You know, because they said I was beyond redemption, beyond rehabilitation. What's that big words? I don't even know what they meant. You know, I told the DA, "I'll redeem you," whatever. You know, that's how ignorant I was. As soon as stuck on stupid. But you know, they wanted to do that. They said there was no hope. I couldn't change. You know, he must be executed. At that time, at the gas chamber. Sam couldn't say prison. You must rid society of this vermin, and you know how they talk. I don't know. It's all on record. And so if anyone ever thought he was beyond redemption, let alone the doors opening, let alone coming free, let alone enjoying everything I don't deserve, you guys. You know, there's one right there, my beautiful wife. I don't deserve any of that. So am I grateful? Absolutely. Even if I want to give, that's why I travel the world, the prisons, you know, Africa, Asia, India, Australia, you know, Mexico, just sharing the story, you know, of the grace of God, you know. And a lot of it has to do, and I don't know how time it got, but to share it really, really quick about forgiveness. I mentioned 2 women earlier, when I was in the boys' home, one of them, they were called aunts and uncles for the little guys, and they would make us, remember her name, Aunt Barbara, and I would hate it. I would pretend like I'm asleep, and she'd come by to all the little guys and say, "Okay, say the Lord's Prayer, girl." You know, and I go, "You're not asleep." Okay. Our Father who art, say it right. Our Father who art in heaven, and you know. So I say the prayer, and as she goes, there's about 9 of us, right? 19 years old, little kids. Well, years later, because of Aunt Barbara, I'm in solitary confinement in San Quentin. Hard time. It's bread and water. Then you can, now it's illegal. Then you could do it. And I'm about like 10 days, you know, just bread and water, starving, you know, 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid, right? That's hard, right? Nobody's there. You know, we're there for riots and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I thought I was just going to hang myself. I can't take it. I'm, you know, starving, I'm hungry, and it was a horrible, horrible time. They would come sometimes, the cops, and weight you down with the hoses. And all you got is your boxer shorts. Just torture, right? And then I said, "Man, I can't take this. I can't take this." And then out of the blue comes, clear as a bell, "Our Father, who art in heaven, holy be your name." It just filled that whole cell. And such a peace came over. Next thing I know, boom, I slept. I'm not hung, I slept. You know, hours and hours, and maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 hours. Then, like the hunger somehow vanished, and I got a strength. But it's that prayer. I heard that prayer clearly, and I saw Aunt Barbara just telling me, "Say this prayer. Say this prayer, or so that someday you'll need it." And I needed it then, and he came to, and this is years before I even became a Christian. The grace of God, you know.
It was there all along.
It could have been my next book. Yeah, he was there all along.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And of course, I always give God the glory and the praise, you know. I thank him and the wonderful ministry of Victory Outreach. You know. Thank you guys too for considering us and, you know, taking some time out, you know, to come, and wishing you guys too a happy 4th.
No, absolutely. Any final thoughts?
You're going to be a doctor.
Maybe. I just want to thank you for being vulnerable. It takes a lot, especially for men, when there's a lot of them stuck in narcissistic or machismo type of just personality. And you are a direct example. You know, I speak a lot about having resilience and having the resilience to push forward And you're an example of that, of just resilience, of redemption, even when you think that there is nothing left or there's no way, there's no hope. There always is.
Amen to that.
You know, and in closing, like I said, you know, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your message. And, you know, for the audience, if you thought this was going to be a podcast about glorifying the hits and the different incidents and the fights in prison, that's not what today was about. Today was about little Art. It was about what gravitated him towards that. It was about what his inner struggles were, not about this Hollywood BS that goes on, how we glorify the mafias and so forth, but it's about something he said. Every man, every gang member, every headman, you can fill in. Cartel member, you fill it in. But when they're in there all alone and they don't have their wife, their kids to even hold their hand, they live in regret. They live in sorrow. They live in, was this really all worth it? And if you want to get all the ins and outs of all the action, if that's what you're into, then get the book, because there's a powerful story in there. There's a powerful story where you can hear all of the excitement, if you call it excitement, you know, we drive towards. But that's where the story's at. Today is about a man on a journey of redemption through his faith and connecting with a woman after so many years, someone he never thought he was going to connect with. And then, boom, in that moment, instant family, and he became a father. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fatherhood Voices, where we're on a journey to heal the relationship between fathers and their children.
Until next time.